Hello and welcome back to my channel full of reads. So I got a question for you. Are we just a body and a brain without any kind of guidance, without any kind of higher being? Or do we have a soul? There are two main philosophies that try to answer this question. One is physicalism, which is something I've never heard of before. And it basically states that all of our actions are just products of our brains. There's no higher consciousness, and consciousness is just an illusion. That we're basically computers, we're basically robots. Our brains control everything. The other philosophy is dualism, and it basically states that we are a body and a soul. We exist in two different forms, a body and a soul. And that has been believed by more people throughout most of the time. So in his new book, Seeing the Supernatural, Lee Strobel interviews doctors, scholars, theologians, and normal everyday people to show you that not only there's the world that we can see, but there is a world that we cannot see, a supernatural world. I will briefly go over the book. I'm not going to go over each chapter. Highly recommend you pick up a copy of the book because it's very fascinating. And each chapter is a different interview on a different topic, whether it's near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, vivid dreams, ghosts, demons, Satan. If any of that interests you, I highly recommend you pick up a copy. So in the first chapter, Lee Strobel is interviewing Dr. Sharon Dirks. She's a PhD. She studies biochemistry and brain imaging. And she started off her life as agnostic, and it wasn't until she got into college that she sat in on a forum with Christian scholars, and that's when she realized that you could be a scientist and a Christian at the same time. But she's an expert on brain imaging. She can, read the MRIs and all the scans and sees where your brain is lighting up during what stimuli. But she cannot tell what you're experiencing. She cannot read your thoughts. She cannot see what you're thinking, but she can see what's lighting up under what stimuli. So I'll read an excerpt of the book and it'll kind of explain it a little bit more. This is on page 11 and 12, and I'm starting in the middle of a thought, so it'll clear up. To illustrate this further, Dirks describes a thought experiment. She said, what if Mary, who is a scientist, had detailed knowledge of the physics and chemistry of vision? She knew all about the intricate structure of the eye and how it functions and how it sends electrical signals to the brain through the optic nerve, where they are converted into images. But what if she were blind and then one day she was suddenly able to see? At that moment of receiving her sight, does Mary learn anything new about vision? Dirks asked. My eyes widened. Of course, Lee said. That means physical facts alone cannot explain the first-person experience of consciousness. No amount of knowledge about the physical working of the eye and the brain would get Mary any closer to the experience of what it's like to actually see. What is your conclusion? Lee asked. That consciousness simply cannot be synonymous with brain activity. So just because you're conscious and your brain is firing off at different spots, that doesn't explain what the experience is you're going through. It's super fascinating. Example of us having a soul as humans is in the same chapter, and she talks about this lady, Pamela Reynolds, and on page 14, she quotes, she says, in her book, Dirks tells the story of Pamela Reynolds, who in 1991 suffered a severe brain hemorrhage from an aneurysm. During her surgery, called a standstill operation, doctors cooled her body temperature, flatlined her heart, and her brain signals and drained all the blood from her head. Clinically, she was dead. But when she was resuscitated after surgery, she astonished everyone by telling how she was conscious the whole time. If we were just a brain and a body and nothing more, how can you explain that experience? The only explanation is that we have a soul, that we're more than a brain and a body. There are thousands of stories like that where people who are clinically dead under medical supervision, and when they get resuscitated, they tell them everything that was going on in a room, tell them what this doctor was doing, what that nurse was doing, where they've seen dead relatives. They've traveled thousands of miles just to come back and to be able to tell this experience. So in another chapter, they tell a story about a lady named Barbara. In this chapter, they're talking about miracles and the power of prayer. And man, if this is true, this is really astonishing. This is make you want to get on your knees and worship the Lord with all your heart and all your soul. But they tell the story of Barbara, and so Barbara's story is that, and let me read a little bit about it. So Barbara's already getting sick, and it says eventually, after her condition worsened, the diagnosis of progressive multiple sclerosis was confirmed through spinal taps and other diagnostic tests. Doctors at the Mayo Clinic thoroughly examined her and agreed with the dire conclusion. The prognosis was not good, Marshall said. Over the next 16 years, her condition continued to deteriorate. She spent months in hospitals, often for pneumonia, after being unable to breathe. One diaphragm was paralyzed, rendering a lung non-functional. The other lung operated at less than 50%. A trach tube was inserted into her neck with oxygen being pumped from canisters in her garage. She lost control of her urination and bowels, and a catheter was inserted into her bladder, and a bag was attached for waste. She was legally blind, becoming unable to read and only able of seeing objects in the gray shadows. and eventually a feeding tube was inserted. Her abdomen was swollen grotesquely because of the muscles in her intestines didn't work. She now needed continuous oxygen, and her muscles and her joints were becoming contracted and deformed because she could not move or exercise, Marshall said. The Mayo Clinic was her last hope, but they had no recommendations to help stop this progressive wasting disease except to pray for a miracle. So someone sent her story into a Christian radio station, and thousands of people started praying for her. And on that Pentecost Sunday in 1981, she heard a voice that says, "Get up and walk, my child." Well, my child, get up and walk, is what she said she heard. And then right after that, she was completely healed. She was able to get up. She was able to walk. She was breathing on her own. She didn't need the tube. She didn't need oxygen. Her muscles just came back to full strength, like right before people's eyes. And it was a fascinating miracle that just absolutely changed her life. And there's a couple of videos on YouTube, and I'll share a link to some of the videos so you can watch it yourself. There's chapters on spiritual encounters. They tell a story about how Evel Knievel, who lived a life in the world and lived it up. And in the last 2 weeks of his life, he had an encounter on the beach, and he turned his life over to Christ. And for the rest of his time on earth, he shared the gospel and the good word of Jesus Christ. In another great chapter, and I've heard about this before, and I think it's absolutely amazing that in the Muslim world, Muslims are being converted by the thousands because they have a dream of Jesus. And they'll have this dream, and it'll be Jesus talking to them. And when they wake up, they're not converted, but in their dream they'll have a dream about a specific person will be there with them. Or they'll see a specific person in their dream, and then a few weeks later they might be at the market and run across this person. Or they'll have a dream about Jesus, and then a few weeks later, a few days later, a Christian will come in their life and they will be converted. And that's really the only way in the Muslim world that you're going to be exposed to Christ, if he comes to you, because they're not too tolerant of other religions. But that's just a few examples of stories in this book. If you don't know who Lee Strobel is, he was an atheist, didn't believe in God, didn't believe in none of it. And one day his wife converted to Christianity, and he spent several years trying to disprove Jesus and Christianity, and was going to show her what kind of hogwash she done fell in with. So during his investigation, his only conclusion was that there was Jesus who died on the cross, who was God, who died for our sins, who rose again after 3 days. And so ever since then, he's been a follower of Jesus Christ. So this book is full of stories like that, full of chapters like that. There's chapters on Satan, there's chapters on demons, there's chapters on angels, whether we have a guardian angel. If you're new to the faith like me, or even if you've been in the faith for your whole life, this book will maybe shed some light on things that you don't really get taught every day, or that you don't read every day. But I highly recommend this book for you. Like I've said probably 30 times in this video, but if you like that sort of thing, pick up a copy.